We got through that, right? Basic idea is if the cost of activity rises, you're going to do less of it. Or the benefit of activity rises, you'll do more of it. As these costs and benefits change, people's actions are going to change. So did we talk about obesity and health insurance? Okay, so we got through that. Another set of unintended consequences. During COVID, it was the past couple months, after somewhat reopening, a lot of states are shutting back down again. Not as hard as last time, but in New York, Pennsylvania, a couple other states in the Northeast, they're trying to limit bars, like how many people can drink in bars and how they're there to drink. So they put a requirement that people eating at bars have to order food and have to be sitting at a table. So basically you're treating it like a meal where you happen to be getting alcohol instead of going to the bar to talk with your friends and walk around and everything, which is how so many people can get sick at bars. The idea being that if you're sitting at your seat, you're eating a meal, you're not engaging in a lot of these risky behaviors. So even though you're in public, you're not wearing a mask while you're eating, drinking and stuff, you're doing it in a much more safe way than a normal trip to the bar on the night out. But what really happens is you get the Cuomo chips and salsa, where you get people sitting there nibbling on like a $1 appetizer and sitting there and just drinking all night. Because people still wanted to drink. Now you put this incentive in front of them that they have to buy food. A lot of people are still going to buy the food to be able to go out. So you end up with New York Governor Cuomo declaring what foods are meals and what food isn't. He clamped down on places giving like the chips and salsa away because that's technically not a meal. Said buffalo wings weren't a meal, and like everyone from Buffalo got upset about that because that's like central to their culture. So this isn't the first time we've seen something like this happen, and not the first time we've seen this happen in New York. In the late 1890s, they had another prohibition-style rule that prevented drinking on Sundays. Oh, yeah?
In Lewistown, there's this bar that started selling 25-cent pieces of toast so you could go and drink. They
Yeah.
added it to the menu, and that actually caught on fire, and people started doing that all the time.
There's a couple places in Altoona that are like that.
There's one.
They're not 25-cent toast, though. That's the best one I've heard yet.
The Castle Pub in Evansburg gives out chips. It's like a bag of chips.
They just give them out for free?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, okay. I like that. So the law was called like the Raines Act, named after like whoever sponsored it. So they created what they called the Raines sandwich. And this was not meant to be eaten. It was old, moldy food and stuff that they just slapped together into a sandwich. And when you ordered a drink, because you had to order a meal with every single drink you ordered. So they would come out, set the sandwich and the drink down, immediately pick up the sandwich and take it to the next table where someone would drink. But this is what they did to get around the law. They're complying with the letter of the law, but definitely not the spirit of the law. It was funny, the unintended consequences that resulted. There's also a thing that like only hotels could serve alcohol. So every like shitty tavern just started like putting up like rooms to rent, and they're allowed to be open 24/7. So instead of preventing people from drinking on Sundays, more and more people follow the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law, and ended up drinking way more. They refer to it as the best drunken daydream that lasted like 2 or 3 years until authorities changed the law and then cracked down even more finally. So the lessons from whether it's the Cuomo chips or from the Raines sandwich is the first that people respond to incentives, but not always the way you want them to. So adding the fact that they had to buy some cheap food, I'm sure it prevented some people from going out. But because the cost was so small relative to the benefit that they saw of being able to actually see their friends again, after like 5-6 months of being stuck in their homes, that wasn't really that much of a deterrent. Although it does change the drinking style somewhat. So maybe it was effective this time. We're going to talk about this more. Actually, no, we're not going to talk about the market for drugs. That's 102, sorry. So if you take me for 102, we'll look at the market for illegal drugs like crystal meth analyzing it as a market with buyers and sellers. The other lesson to learn is the unintended consequences of policies. The idea with the Reigns sandwich was, or with the Reigns Act, was to prevent people from drinking on Sundays. But because of a couple loopholes, the exact opposite is what happened. And then other crimes increased, and they had to spend more money on policing, filling up jails with more people that weren't abiding by the laws. So a lot of unintended consequences. It can be very difficult to anticipate how people are going to react. You don't know how much they actually wanted to do that thing you're trying to stop them from doing. In this case, they really wanted to drink, and they would do what they can to get around it. The next guidepost is the seen and the unseen. So we want to examine the observable consequences of actions and then the unobservable consequences. So the observable consequences from the Reigns Act was people, if they want to drink on Sundays, they'll have to order some food with it. What ended up happening, the unobservable consequences from the very, from before the law was passed, when they were designing it, they didn't think that drinking was actually going to increase. And people were going to be turning these small taverns into hotels. So always ask yourself, what's going to happen next? So one action, so this would be like a purchase, a price change, that'll change people's incentives. And when incentives change, people's actions are going to change. So policy might have a good result in the short run, or for one particular group, but when it does end up changing incentives for other groups and encouraging them to act in costly ways for society, it can lessen the positive effects of some policy. So one example is the idea of too big to fail from the financial crisis. The federal government came in and supported banks that were failing because they were so important to the financial system that it would have had terrible results for pretty much everyone in the country, anyone that has a bank account. So in the short run,
On the third sentence, is it supposed to say one?
it is supposed to say one. You guys can see that. Okay. So obviously, it was a good result in the short run to save these banks, to prevent more financial chaos, prevent a deeper recession from occurring. But it also encourages banks to engage in risky behavior because now they know they're protected if their investments fail. So by lessening the cost of doing bad or putting too many risky investments on their balance sheet, we're now encouraging risky behavior. So now thinking about unintended consequences, thinking about incentives. How can we reduce car accidents? What's that? Make safer cars is one way. So better quality drivers. So decrease the usage of cars.
Make the elderly retake their driving.
It's a South Park episode about that.
Oh, yeah, there is.
Yeah, the Grey Dawn.
Yeah.
Yeah, the AARP invades the town. And they defeat everyone in the town because old people wake up so early. Someone else is still in bed. What are some other ideas? What are ways to change the incentives to reduce car accidents? We can get rid of cars, that's one way.
Offer more benefits in your insurance program, to be a safer driver.
So not the accident forgiveness, but what? The thing you plug in your car and it sees if you're a safe driver?
Yeah.
And reward people for that, or reward them for not being in an accident?
Mm-hmm. Put restrictions on people driving, and put restrictions on the qualifications.
Okay, so instead of license, just checking the boxes and you don't study for the permit test and then you pass and then you actually make it hard.
In other countries, there's a couple of different steps you gotta take. First, you get the permit with the pet, then you get the permit where you can drive on the island with the pet, then you get a highway permit where you can get well, and then there's a test.
Oh wow, okay.
More penalties if you are not, increase insurance rate later on.
I I would do.
Yeah, so increase the cost. But
Yeah. More incentive to drive better.
Find a percentage of your income instead of a flat.
so if you're loaded, you actually get punished if you get in an accident
Yeah.
instead of just being annoyed. Okay. What about making cars less safe?
That
Heard.
that could work, but that could also melt.
It'll increase the cost of getting in a car accident. So the economist Gordon Tullock, back in the 70s, cars were super unsafe. So have you ever been in an old car from 60s and 70s? You had that metal and chrome dashboard and everything's sharp with no airbags, no seatbelts. How do we reduce car accidents? How do we reduce car fatalities? And a lot of them said a lot of the same things you guys said. And safer cars is a big one. When they asked Gordon Tullock, he said, well, if you want to reduce car accidents to 0, you put a giant metal spike on the steering wheel, 1 inch from the person's chest.
Oh my god.
Would you go over 5 miles an hour if you were driving a car like this?
I would not. Seriously.
Now, we would never want to do that because people would get hurt. But this is a way to think of how to change the incentives, so increase the cost. I think it'd be much better if we just increase the benefits of not getting into car accidents.
Have there been any studies that compare positive incentives versus negative insurance and whether which is more effective?
That's a good question. I'll look that up and tell you about that next class. They have shown that car accidents have increased substantially since cars became more safe. But injuries and deaths have gone down. So cars have become safer. People aren't getting hurt as bad, but we're getting more accidents. I'm assuming it's more tiny fender benders.
Do you know if they've seen any correlation since the advent of cell phones in number of car accidents?
I haven't read any paper describing that, but I would assume it's yes. Just having driven in a car before. Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head.
There's different ratings everywhere, and they're all one.
Toyota.
I feel like Toyota talks about being the safest.
Me and Aubrey went to Walmart last week, and I was backing out really slow because I have to be careful now. I was backing out really slow, and this lady in this van just backs out super fast and hits me and drives away. So me and Aubrey follow her through Altoona, and we were and then we just yeah. So, but she just scratched my leg a little bit. There's no actual damage. So I was would you look next time? So, yeah.
So if she was driving a smaller car that's more dangerous, she wouldn't have hit you? She'd have had to pay attention?
If I drove a smaller.
If she drove a smaller car. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She would eventually pull over.
No.
It's full on,
We followed her until Target, and then we were you know what, never mind, let's let it go. But she took a picture of her license in case there was damage, because this lady was not stopping.
She wasn't looking at us.
Yeah, she wouldn't look. She was like this. Wow.
A lot of great drivers out there.
I know.
We've also shown those backup cams.
I have a backup
Increased
camera.
accidents and hitting pedestrians.
Oh, really?
Because people only look at the screen instead of looking all around them.
That's what I do.
That's not even used to that.
I used to never use it, but my car has it now, and it's too convenient not to. But it's super hard to remind yourself constantly, hey, I gotta look around too. Okay. Yeah, so next, value is subjective. And that phrase, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Well, the value of each good or service varies with each individual's preferences, what their wants, what their needs are. So it's determined by what each person is willing and able to pay for that good or service. Because we all have different needs that we're trying to fulfill, we all have different wants. So one person may value a good very highly because it's something that they need, or something that because of their interest that they really like. Whereas another person might think that's stupid. A good example of this is old coins. Anyone here a coin collector?
Oh, I have one.
See, no one in my other class liked old coins.
I like old coins.
I like old coins too. I think they're pretty cool. A lot of people are willing to spend more money than the coin is actually worth. So they'll pay $5 for a super rare penny, even though that makes no sense if you're just using this currency. Because they see some sort of value in it because it was super rare. That one year in World War II, they made pennies out of steel. Those are pretty valuable just because it was the 1 year they weren't made out of copper. But a lot of the people think it's stupid and wouldn't ever pay extra money for old coins just because they don't enjoy it. So it's just one example of value being subjective. The old idea the classical economists had was what they call the labor theory of value. That labor, the value of a good was based off of the labor that went into producing it. So whatever the cost was, that's what the good is worth. If you sell for any more than that, you're ripping that person off. If you sell any less than that, you're getting ripped off. We'll talk later about how some of the difficulties that arises from the labor theory of value. But it's subjective value that makes mutually beneficial exchange possible. So when two people are involved in exchange, one person, the consumer, purchases something from the seller, both parties are made better off as a result of the trade. The seller has a bunch of like the goods or the services, and they want money. The buyer has a bunch of money, but they want that one particular good or service.
Would the better off be physical, or could that also be like mental?
It could absolutely be mental.
Okay. So like it doesn't have to be a physical better off body, it could be like they're happy with each other.
That's right. They could be happy. Maybe it could be, say they donate to a charity that helps clean up the environment or something. So they feel responsible, they feel happy.
Okay.
It doesn't just have to be something that physically benefits them. So if you think about it, voluntary trade can increase the total wealth in an economy because individuals value what they receive more than what they give up. So you've got all these parties being made better off because they're trading with each other. This is going to come into play later in the course. Now, a question for you guys. Why do diamonds have a higher price, instead of exchange value here, but price, than water? When diamonds are just like, for decoration, water is essential for life.
Marketing, people like made diamonds so valuable like for wedding rings and stuff, and because people said it was valuable, people made it valuable.
It's kind of nuts how they just like created that advertising thing in like the 50s. They're like, you get a woman a diamond ring when you get engaged, and then everyone started doing it.
So most of the things actually cutting the diamonds, like when you want to do it longer term, like it takes someone like a higher person.
It's super expensive, so they're not going to sell like below the cost or recoup it, right? Anyone else?
Not to be that wrong, but would it be like diamonds are more scarce than water?
That isn't wrong.
Is it?
It is not wrong.
Okay.
Someone else have a hand up? All right, don't leave anyone out. Okay, these were all good suggestions. Marketing is actually, I don't know if we're going to talk about marketing a ton in here, but that really can, it can be a good thing where it like lets you know what the product is and if it'll meet your needs or not. But it can also, I won't say a lot of people, but you can, yeah, kind of manipulate people, saying your product's better than what it is, or it'll solve more problems than it actually will. But no person is ever in the position of choosing all the diamonds in the world versus all the water in the world. So marginal analysis, you're looking at what's the value of this next cup of water to me, and what's the value of this next diamond to me. Well, diamonds are rare. Diamonds are expensive to produce. They're going to end up costing a decent amount of money. Well, water, pretty much everywhere, fairly inexpensive to actually produce. And you drink a ton of water, and if you don't get a cup of water now, you can wait 20 minutes and pay for it later. It's not a big deal. Whereas diamonds, much more rare. So the utility of that next diamond is much higher than that next cup of water. Next, information is costly. So information obviously helps us make better choices, but information is expensive to acquire. And often complete information or perfect information about whatever you're doing in a transaction is not optimal. It'll take too much time and too much money to figure that all out. At the end of the day, it's not going to make you that much better off. So obviously, like we've all had buyer's remorse before. Like you think you're going to get a product that's really good, you buy it, ends up not fulfilling your needs. Whether you buy like clothing online, it doesn't quite fit, or maybe it doesn't look the same as like the picture. Maybe you buy some electronics and you're like, hey, it's a pretty good deal, I think I'll get it. Turns out it's a good deal because it's a flimsy piece of crap that breaks in 20 minutes. Definitely be optimal to gather more information in that case. But it can be very difficult. And if the cost of something is low, you can spend a lot more time and money trying to figure out, trying to learn about the product, when in reality it'd be cheaper to buy it. And if it breaks, it breaks. But since information is scarce, uncertainty and information asymmetries are a fact of life. Now, information asymmetry means that one party to a transaction has more knowledge than the other party in that transaction. The stereotypical example of this is the used car dealer. You've got some greasy salesman, looks like Danny DeVito. He's trying to sell you a used car that's 15 years old. It's been in 4 accidents, but it's been fixed up on the outside so it looks fine. On the inside, it's like falling apart. He's got all this information. He knows it's been in 4 accidents. He's the one who fixed it up to try to cover everything up. You don't know. You have to basically trust him. So obviously, there's some ways around this. Oops. Carfax. Someone invented Carfax to track cars to see have they been in accidents before. Like, are these actually decent? They used to have the old like mile readers that would just like spin. I don't know, they call dials or whatever. So you can get in there like under the hood and like turn it back. Now you can't. Everything's like computerized, so I guess that's a good thing. But there were ways to lie about that. The Carfax came in and would tell people, it would reduce the information asymmetry and do it very cheaply. People, so they could figure out if the car they were buying was a piece of junk or not. I mean, now it's become so ubiquitous, like you go to buy a used car, they hand you the Carfax. One of the reasons that gathering information is so costly and can be so difficult is the idea of tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is knowledge that's spread out across society. They call it the knowledge of time and place. You happen to be there, like involved in a transaction. I don't know, you happen to work in a particular industry, and you'll know some specific knowledge that you're not going to find on CNBC or find on like some of the generic like regular news. One of the examples they like to give of this is the company has like administrative assistant. They know they've been there say 30 years. If you ever have a problem, you're like, oh, like, where do I find this? Who do I talk to deal with this? You go there and they'll tell you exactly where to go. Doesn't require like zero amount of education, so you think, oh, it'll be easy to just replace them. But then a new administrative assistant come in, they don't know where to go yet. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know where the things are because of that knowledge that the old administrative assistant built up over time. So it's knowledge, I say nitty-gritty knowledge, just from living your life day in and day out. That's very difficult to write down to put in a news report, or for a company to put in their like annual report. So who's ever stayed on a Friday night, accidentally binged 5 hours of Diners, Drive-In, and Dives? A ton of people have done it. No one wants to admit it, but we've all done it. So in the show, Guy Fieri drives across the country, going to different restaurants, talking to chefs and seeing how they cook their food, like their best dishes, and then obviously eating it in front of us. So he learns all about how different cooks make amazing and creative meals, and he's tasted thousands all across the country. So let me ask you, what's the best restaurant in the United States? Pretty hard to answer, right? I don't think anyone's here has eaten at every restaurant in the United States. Not even Guy Fieri's been able to do that. So it's very difficult to aggregate this knowledge. It's spread out all across the country, all these different restaurants. You've got restaurant owners, you've got cooks, patrons, celebrity chefs. They all know some of this information. Basically, what Guy Fieri does, it would be too difficult for each of us to go around the country trying all these different restaurants just to find out what the best one was. But Guy Fieri gathers this knowledge for us. It's a very easy way to gather and disseminate this information. Obviously, there's a little bit of a problem with this because everyone has different tastes and preferences for food. I hate mushrooms on food. At least one person disagrees with me. Yeah, so it's difficult to trust someone else's taste completely. But we can still get some decent information. You can see how they cook it, what goes into it. He always shows like different patrons in the restaurant talking about how good the different dishes are. And it's low cost for us because the show's entertaining and the costs are spread out across millions of people, like advertisers and stuff. So we can never do it ourselves and have a normal life, but he's able to do it and have a pretty kick-ass life. All right, any questions on this so far? All right, well, let's take a break and you guys have like a random question or something.
I never pronounced Fieri yet. Like, I always pronounce Guy Fieri.
That's what I always thought it was, but you can hear him kind of put like the T in it because it's like how, like, I don't know, they pronounce it in Italian. Once I learned that, I'm like, well, now I have to say it this way.
I didn't know who you were talking about.
How do you pronounce it again?
Fieri.
Fieri.
I had no idea who you were talking about.
He kind of just like powers through like the consonant there. See, it's kind of tough to tell.
So, you mentioned like, I was thinking about what's the best way to do astronomy.
Oh yeah.
I agree that there is no like subjective, this is the best way. What could you at least like rule out and like, I can do this, don't do that? Or do you think everything would pretty much do?
No, I think there's a lot of things you can roll out. The reason I included that on there is the last episode I watched. He went to like a truck that like sells like pastrami sandwiches and like I can do everything on bagels too. And he cooked his pastrami for like something like 4 hours or some ridiculously short amount of time. Like most people cook it overnight. And guy was like shocked by this. But he had the sandwich. He was like, wow, this tastes amazing. I never would have guessed the pastrami was cooked for 4 hours. So it's just to highlight that there's several different methods. And I mean, that I guess would be pretty simple. You get a big piece of pastrami, or I guess several big pieces of pastrami. You cook them up for different lengths of time, different seasoning, and you can figure out which one's the best.
You collect coins too, you said about that. Dropped plenty of coins every day.
I have some old coins, like my grandma gave me a bunch of old coins, and I bought like, I don't know, a few of like yard sales and stuff. My dad has a collection of like a ton of old coins.
I inherited like a bunch of old, my grandfather in World War II got a bunch of like from France and
Oh,
other, like,
that's sweet.
Yeah, and some like German coins, so I have a lot from there. No, that's how I got into it.
Those are really cool. I just have American coins. All right, let's get back to it. So there's two types of analysis that we can do with economics. The first is positive and the second is normative. I think I included the reading on Blackboard, What Should Economists Do by James Buchanan. You don't have to read it, it's just there if you want to read it. It's not super technical, but it's probably a higher level than you would ever need for any 101 class. So the first type is positive analysis. It's called a means-end framework. What it means is you're describing what happens. So you describe the cause and the effect and the process by which some change causes another change. So for a very basic example, when the money supply increases, you're going to have a higher inflation rate. That's a positive analysis. You're just describing what's happening. So the other type is normative analysis. Now these are more value judgments. You're determining, or you're trying to figure out what ought to be. So it's an analysis of whether an outcome is preferable to other alternatives. So instead of just saying what's happening, you're saying, is what's happening good? So is a higher inflation rate good for US consumers? Now you can do some good positive analysis behind this and explain when there's a higher inflation rate, what happens to US consumers. But at the end of the day, you have to make a value judgment and you say, is this good or is this bad? Now, this leads to the devil-angel test, which is how you determine if your positive analysis is good. So if you take, the devil, evil, angel, good, they'll agree on the positive analysis. They'll agree on the cause and effect, but they'll disagree on the normative analysis. The angel will want the good thing to happen, the devil will want the bad thing to happen. Basic idea of this goes back to Adam Smith and, I have this written down, David Hume in England, late 1700s. At the time, they were talking about, instead of having the parishes raise money from their parishioners, just tax everyone and have the government pay like the Church of England. So now, Hume and Smith both said, well, if you do that, you're going to have worse sermons and, in general, less religiosity in people. Because when you had people choosing what parish they wanted to go to and donating money themselves, if the preacher was more charismatic, if they gave better sermons, if the services had better music, they would end up getting more people to go there and more money. Whereas if they were all being paid a fixed salary by the Church of England, they're not going to try as hard. They both agreed to that. Hume was skeptical about the good that the Church of England, or I guess religion in general, could do. So he said, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with switching over to taxes. It'll end up being good. Whereas Smith said, no, that's not a good thing. Religion is important to develop a good sense of civic pride and a close-knit community, and to teach people, to care about each other. So they both agreed on the positive analysis, but what they disagreed on is whether the outcome was good or bad. So in this class, we're going to focus mostly on positive analysis, trying to understand what's going on. We will do a little normative analysis, just saying whether this outcome is good or bad. But that's more difficult to do, especially in a course like this, because we all have different preferences. We all have different beliefs. And while you can use some good positive analysis to justify those beliefs, and to justify whether you believe the outcome is good or bad, there's still going to be differences between what people believe. So it'll be harder for us to reconcile them to objectively grade something, unless you're going on full essays describing why your normative analysis is right. Now we look at economics. There are some that focus on the allocation of resources that try to lead to an equilibrium, or to lead to the best societal well-being. And what should economists do? Buchanan argues against that. So he calls it the allocation paradigm. So basically, all gains from trade are exhausted. Everyone's figured out what they want, and they've bought enough that we're now in equilibrium. No one can be made better off at this point. Unfortunately, there's nothing left to study here. You've just done some math. You've done a few optimization equations. Boom, you're done. This zooms far too much to the real world, where we're constantly moving in and out of equilibrium. New products are being created. Prices are constantly changing based on new resources or new production techniques. In this case, economics just becomes an exercise in doing maximization problems. And you can just have a computer do it or an engineering student do it. Instead, what we want to focus on is the exchange paradigm. So focus on individual actions in the process of learning. Individuals, they have to coordinate their many plans, their wants and goals. They have to They have to deal with uncertainty as they're trying to determine what goods or services to buy. So economics is really about the context within which people act and interact with each other. These are imperfect people. They don't have a ton of knowledge. They don't have perfect knowledge, that's for sure. But they're trying to buy these goods and services, like people, they talk to their friends, they read reviews online. They do try to gather some information. They won't go to the people that have done a poor job for them in the past. I mean, how many of you have said, I refuse to buy from whoever again because of crappy service or bad product? Yeah, we've all been there. I read something about the best way to use Yelp, like to read the reviews, is read like the long detailed ones instead of just like the quick like one-liners people put out, because you'll learn a lot more. Like you look at the overall score and then like the detailed one. Why not the 5 stars? What if there's like hundreds or thousands of people and they're still rated 5 stars?
But if it's a 3 and 4 star, you expect like a total contact.
Yeah. There's always gonna be someone that doesn't like the type of food, or some waiter or waitress is gonna have a bad day and not give great service, so someone's gonna complain. I don't know if I've ever seen like a 5-star place on Yelp. That's the only reason why I asked that.
Have you seen a 1-star place?
I've never scrolled down that far. I'm sure Altoona has a 1-star place.
It's like a trend.
That would be fun. Just hit up like every single 1-star Yelp
Yeah,
place
it's
in
like a
Altoona.
trend online, I think, like try the worst places.
Maybe if we weren't broke,
One of my
this money on terrible food.
friends.
Well, you could like tweet about it. I mean, retweets are basically currency nowadays, right? All right. So when we think of competition, we think of firms, competing over resources or competing over consumers. This is more of a discovery process. It's not a zero-sum game like a football game where one team wins, one team loses. In this case, people lack knowledge, and competition is the means to help discover that knowledge. So what goods do people want? How should we make them? How do we price them? What charity should I donate to? All of these get revealed through competition. So the basic process is there's an idea, like an entrepreneur has an idea for a new product. They isolate this need that they think no one's meeting right now on the market. So they try to get some money for it and then go to sell it. Now consumers want that good if it really does meet their need. The entrepreneur was right. They're going to make a lot of money from it and they're going to keep producing. If they're wrong, then they're going to stop producing the good and those resources will be used to make something else, whether it's by that entrepreneur or by someone else. Firms don't know ahead of time what's going to succeed and what's going to fail. They think they have a good idea, but they're not always right. So it's the discovery process where they actually go and try to sell the product, and then consumers go and buy from them or they don't. Because you could ask consumers, like do a survey ahead of time and say, would you buy this? And they say, oh yeah, that sounds great, I'd love to. And then you put it on the shelves and they just walk right past it. As they say, talk is cheap. Okay. So in this class, this is the principles of macroeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of households and firms, how they make choices, how they interact in markets, and how the government attempts to influence their choices through whether it's like tax policy or regulation policy, maybe even getting involved a little bit in producing some of these goods and services themselves. Macroeconomics is a study of the whole economy. So we'll be looking at things like inflation, unemployment, long-run economic growth. I wanted to start this, and the textbook starts 101 and 102 the same way, with like the basics of economics. So I wanted to really talk about like individualism, choice, the role of profit, these sorts of things, before we get into studying the large macroeconomy. And this table just highlights some differences. So in this class, looking at macroeconomics, we'll be like why economies experience periods of recession and increasing unemployment, why have some economies grown so much faster than others, inflation rate, the value of the US dollar, whether government intervention can reduce the severity of recessions. Real big picture stuff. less focusing on consumers. Like, how do firms decide to price the products they're selling? How do consumers react to changes in prices? All right. So the goal of the market is to maximize material well-being. It brings buyers and sellers together, and through the price mechanism, which shows how much people value different goods or services or resources, we maximize society's well-being, or the material well-being. Obviously, difficult for the market to make people happy, so we're talking about material well-being. But the market, it's a process. People are constantly buying and selling things. So remember that it's dynamic. A lot of times we'll do static analysis, so we'll draw a supply and demand curve, and something will happen, it'll shift one of the curves. I don't want to focus, I just want to remind you guys that that's not like the only thing, like that's not how an economy functions. It's just an abstraction, it's a simplified version so that we can understand some of these things. So the optimal allocation of resources is constantly changing, and it emerges from this market process. So there's entrepreneurial successes and failures. So some entrepreneurs do a great job finding these new consumer needs and producing a good to fill that. Some of them fail. There's profit and loss. Profit encourages firms to do more of what they're doing. It's a sign of success and an incentive to keep going. Whereas loss is telling them what they're doing is wrong. Consumers don't want what they have to offer. And if they keep it up, they're going to go out of business. There's constantly new knowledge and new ideas that we're using to solve problems. All right. Okay, yeah, we'll end with white claws. So, profit, definition, revenue minus the cost of production. So it's the money you make after you pay all your bills. It's evidence that consumers are receiving value from their good or service, and it encourages more production. Also encourages other firms to begin producing the same or similar goods. I can't think of a better possible example than hard seltzers. And it's going to be really sad in like 4 or 5 years when people forget about how these blew up and have to find a new example. White Claws and I think Truly's like the first two, and they came out like 3 years ago, and no one really drank them. Out of nowhere, the next summer they blew up. Everyone was talking about White Claws, and they had, I don't even know, the guy made the video. I forget what his name is. Kami-san? What happened? People were buying White Claws like crazy. There was even a shortage for a little bit because they weren't expecting so much demand. Everyone else got on board. Natty started making a seltzer. Bud Light makes a seltzer. Four Loko made a seltzer, which is basically just a Four Loko. Corona came out with one, right before the coronavirus hit, which was terrible timing from a marketing standpoint. Because White Claws were making so much money and so many people wanted to buy them, and I don't know who produces them, but whatever company produces them, making money like gangbusters. Other firms saw that. They said, hey, this is a consumer need. This is what people really want, suddenly out of nowhere. And they all got on board and started making them. So that profit encouraged these firms to make what consumers actually wanted. And profit was, like I said, the signal this is going on and the incentive for them to do it.
What's your favorite White Claw?
Everyone's going to boo me. Lime.
Lime?
Lime.
Ew. I've never had it.
Yeah, I don't.
Yes, whenever everyone leaves the lime in like the bottom of the cooler,